Hello, my name is Dr. Appel from Ado Psychology Center, where we specialize in treating anxiety, depression, and OCD. Welcome to our video seminar series. Hope you enjoy this video. This video is on OCD treatment challenges and solutions. For all the OCD therapists out there, you can imagine how throughout treatment, I'm sure you've experienced many times where treatment challenges came up, and perhaps you weren't sure exactly how to address them. So this video is definitely for you. And also for clients out there who have noticed challenges coming up in their treatment, this video might be helpful for you as well. Goals for this video are to learn about OCD treatment challenges and learn about solutions. ERP, exposure and response prevention, is considered the gold standard therapy for OCD, and I speak more about this and I go more into detail in my basic video seminar on OCD, so definitely check that out before you continue watching this video. But in short, the treatment involves refraining from engaging in compulsions, and that's the X over here you see on the screen, and also engaging in exposures. So exposing yourself to your fear. So as a quick example, someone has contamination OCD, so perhaps touching doorknobs would be exposures. And then response prevention is anytime throughout the day you feel like you really need to wash your hands due to some obsession you're having, you refrain from washing your hands. So you can imagine this is a hard treatment to do for many clients because they're so used to washing their hands whenever they feel like they need to, or engaging in the compulsions that they feel compelled to do. And therefore, there are a number of treatment challenges that come up, as well as the fact that this treatment can sometimes have certain nuances that people are not familiar with, which make it more challenging as well. So let's get into the details now. So here's a list of common challenges that come up in treatment. And I'm going to go through one by one on the next few slides, but just to see the whole list at once. Do I really have OCD? And even if I do, how do I know that this trigger is just OCD and not real? Or there's a double bind, also known as a two-tailed spike, which we'll talk more about soon. What about when exposures turn into compulsions? And this can happen in two ways. Someone can be repeating exposures again and again until it's done correctly. So in that way, it's a compulsion. Or they can be using exposures as a checking or testing compulsion. Number 4, I understand what I need to do for ERP, but when I'm triggered, I feel so stuck. I feel like I'm in a matrix when I'm triggered. So I know I have OCD in therapy, everything makes sense, but once I'm triggered, I feel like I have no choice but to engage in my compulsion. What do I do now? You can't tell me like, oh, just don't do it, right? Because I know I'm not supposed to, and I understand that I have OCD, but it still feels so impossible to not engage in my compulsion in the moment. Number 5, how do I differentiate OCD doubt from regular doubt? We all have doubts. We all need to figure things out. How do I know if my doubt is OCD or if it's just regular doubt, like the rest of us experience, and I should be addressing it? Number 6, how do I make decisions when I keep going down rabbit holes trying to find the right or correct answer? So I know I have OCD, but I still have to make decisions in life, and my OCD brain is not allowing me to figure out what decision I should be making. Number 7, I can't seem to stay motivated throughout the week to stay committed to ERP homework. So in the first couple of days, maybe after therapy, I'm good, but I don't stay motivated throughout the whole week. Number 8, I'm doing exposures, but the distress level stays the same throughout the exposure. It's not getting better. Or I'm doing exposures, but my OCD is not getting better. So throughout the whole week, I'm still doing the exposures, but my OCD is just the same as it was. And number 10, even when I succeed in response prevention, I still feel like I have an unresolved itch. And how do I deal with that? So I'm not doing the compulsion, but I feel a strong urge to do it. And the urge is like really powerful. How do I deal with an unresolved itch? So let's get into each of these, explain them a bit more, and then come up with solutions for each one. So let's begin with the first one. Do I really have OCD? So for example, someone maybe has pedophilia OCD. So again, they are not a pedophile. They have no interest in kids, but they are afraid, what if I am? Or what if when I saw that kid, I thought they were cute? Does that mean I'm a pedophile? So they say, like, they come into therapy, they're working on things, and then one day they say, but wait a second, how do I know for sure I have OCD? Maybe this is a real genuine concern that I need to address. And even if I do have OCD in general, maybe this specific trigger is not OCD. So maybe, in general, I know I have pedophilia OCD, but this time when I saw the kid and I thought they were cute, that trigger is real. And that one is, I really have to deal with. So this is a very common, challenge that comes up in OCD treatment for many subtypes. I'm just giving one example. The next one I'm calling the double bind. I've also heard people referring to this as the two-tail spike. And what happens here is someone might, for example, have an obsession that if I don't go into the room with my right foot first, I am going to have a terrible day. And it's not for religious reason, it's not a cultural thing, it's just their OCD. And so the exposure is to walk into the room with your left foot. What happens then sometimes is that now the correct response for this person is to walk into the room with their left foot. And so now they're very afraid of walking in with their right foot because that's the wrong response. So the new exposure becomes walking in with your right foot. And as you can see, this can become an issue where you're dancing back and forth between the left foot and the right foot. And, there is no way to just keep moving forward because every time you do one, that becomes the right response. And then the other one becomes the wrong response. And so this is what's called the double bind issue. The next treatment challenge can be when exposures turn into compulsions. And this can happen one in two ways. First, an exposure can become a repeating compulsion where the person is doing the exposure again and again until they're doing it the right way. So for example, let's say you have a patient who has religious OCD and they are, repeating prayer multiple times because they're not sure they have the right concentration. And so you tell them to purposely pray in an area where there's lots of disturbances and you may not have the perfect concentration. And that's the exposure. So the person does it, but then the person asks themselves, wait a second, was this place really distracting or was it not so distracting? In which case I did the exposure all wrong. And so now I need to redo it. So let me find a different place where there is more distraction and let me do the exposure there. And then the person can be repeating the exposure again and again and again. So the exposure itself is becoming a compulsion. This can especially happen when therapists often give the advice to clients that if they do an exposure and then they undo it somehow, they should redo the exposure. So for example, someone, let's say, is touching a doorknob as an exposure for contamination OCD, and they're supposed to just go on with their day. But instead, they give in to their urge and they use hand sanitizer. So the advice sometimes is re-expose yourself. Go back and touch it again, right? You want the exposure to take effect. But therapists need to be aware when the exposure is becoming a compulsion, where the person is constantly redoing the exposure again and again and again as a compulsion, that could be an issue. Another way that exposures can turn into compulsions is through checking or testing compulsions. So for example, someone might have relationship OCD. And so maybe they are concerned that their partner is not attractive enough for them. And so the exposure is to purposely look at some unflattering pictures of your partner to trigger yourself and then move on with your day. But now this person is not just doing the exposure as was prescribed, but rather they are throughout the day curious to see like, okay, where am I with my OCD? Can I get over it finally? Like, I really don't want to have to deal with all these doubts. Can I finally get over it? Let me test myself. Let me look at a picture and see my response. See if I could have a good response. So that's another way where the exposure itself can turn into a checking or testing compulsion. Next one here is I understand ERP, but when triggered, I feel so stuck. And I think this happens a lot with clients where they understand the reason for the treatment, they understand the purpose, they recognize they have OCD, they know what they need to do, but in the moment of their trigger, they feel so stuck, they feel like they just can't engage in the ERP homework. They can't do the exposures, they can't refrain from engaging in their compulsions. And so this is another issue that obviously comes up in therapy where they know what they need to do, they recognize it's OCD, but they just feel like they are having a lot of trouble and they're so stuck they can't engage in the treatment. The next one here is how to differentiate OCD from regular doubt. We all have doubt sometimes, and when we do, we try coming to a conclusion, finding solutions. So some of the OCD sometimes might say, like, how do I know if this doubt I have is real doubt or OCD doubt? Relationship OCD is a great example where people are deciding whether they want to commit to a certain relationship or marry their significant other. And so they, and they're doubting and they're saying like, okay, there's some good things, some bad things, I'm not sure. How do I know if it's just OCD doubt or if it's regular doubt and I should address it and I should be able to come to a conclusion? It's something worth thinking about. That's another very common one. The next one here is how do I make decisions when I keep going down rabbit holes trying to find the right or correct answer? I'm trying to make a decision here. I'm trying to figure out what type of life to live. And I don't know if, every time I try going down this process, I just go down rabbit holes. So for example, I'm trying to think about like what type of morals I want to abide by, right? Like how much of a moral person I want to be. Do I want to, when I'm at work, do I want to make sure I'm working every hour so that I'm not slacking on the job because my boss is paying me? Or do I want to, work, but also sometimes, have some downtime? Um, and that's okay. That's within my moral standards. So I want to decide what type of person I want to be. But every time I try doing this, I go down a rabbit hole with a lot of OCD doubting and a lot of OCD thoughts saying that if I do this, then I'm immoral. If I do that, I am moral. And so I get caught up in this haze. This happens a lot with the pure O, purely obsessional, which is also usually accompanied by mental compulsions. But with that subtype especially, people can often be very caught up in their minds, trying to figure things out, um, and having trouble because they're constantly going down rabbit holes because OCD keeps making them go down rabbit holes. The next one here is I can't seem to stay motivated throughout the week to stay committed to ERP homework. So this one is where I know the treatment and I could do it for the first couple of days after therapy, but I just don't seem to stay motivated throughout the rest of the week. And this could be an issue because we know that consistency is key. And if you're not motivated, then you're not doing the homework, then it's hard to get better. So this is another one that often comes up in therapy. Next one here is I'm doing exposures, but the distress level stays the same throughout the exposure. Like I was expecting as I'm doing the exposure eventually to learn how to, habituate to it and not feel stressed out anymore, not feel anxious. But I'm feeling just as anxious, and sometimes anxiety gets worse during the exposure. What do I do about that? The next one is I'm doing exposures, but my OCD is not getting better. So I'm doing exposures as prescribed, but I'm still suffering from OCD. What's going on? Why are the exposures not working the way they're supposed to be working? So it's not that in the moment I'm not feeling better. My OCD in general doesn't seem to be getting better, even though I'm doing exposures. How about this issue? Even when I succeed in response prevention, I still feel like I have an unresolved itch. And this is also very common because I'm so used to engaging in my compulsions, I can refrain from it perhaps as part of the therapy, but it doesn't feel good. I still feel like I have this unresolved itch, and I'm afraid that at some point I'm just going to have to give in and deal with my compulsion. In fact, sometimes this itch kind of builds up. As I'm refraining, I feel more and more like I just got to go ahead and do my compulsion. So, for example, in contamination OCD, I touch the doorknob, I don't put hand sanitizer, but my hands feel so dirty. I just got to put hand sanitizer on. All I could think about for the rest of the day is I got to put hand sanitizer on. And I can't live life like this. This is more interfering than my actual compulsions, maybe. So this is another very common issue that can come up. The common denominator of all of these challenges is related to trouble with conveying irrelevance. And this is a really important point that we'll talk more about when we get to the solution section of this seminar. But in OCD, the ultimate goal is to convey irrelevance to your obsessions. And all of these issues come up when we're giving way too much attention and not being good at conveying irrelevance. It might sound kind of vague now, but let's jump into the specific solutions for each of these issues and see how this might come up and might start making more sense as we go on with the video. So before you get too disheartened from all of these challenges that can come up, rest assured that I have listed here solutions for each of these challenges, And hopefully, if you try implementing it, or if you're a therapist and you try implementing it with your clients, it will make the ERP therapy process go smoother. Let's begin with this one. Do I really have OCD? And even if I do, how do I know that this trigger is just OCD and not real? So the first answer is yes, you do, right? You've been diagnosed with OCD, you're doing ERP work. And so let's stop playing this game and this question of whether I have OCD or not. You definitely do. Now, if this trigger falls into your general OCD themes, you should assume that it's OCD, period. So again, if you say I have, pedophilia OCD, but when I saw that kid, I was kind of like, I thought they were cute. Maybe that's like a real pedophilic type thought and not just OCD. Well, if your theme is pedophilia OCD, you can assume that this doubt you're having is a regular OCD doubt. If your mind keeps nagging you, just view it as a movie that feels real, but is not. Okay, and that's a really good one. So when it comes to OCD triggers, you know your theme. So anything that relates to your theme that comes up as a trigger, you have to treat it as if you're watching a movie that feels so real. It feels like, one actor is about to shoot another actor. But in reality, it's just a movie. Ask yourself, what others would likely think in this situation? Okay, so don't look for certainty. But you could be like, what would other people feel like if they were walking the playground, playing with their kids, they saw a kid, like, oh, the kid's so cute. What would they think? Embrace the opportunity to accept uncertainty. So almost look forward to this opportunity, telling yourself, like, when you wake up in the morning, be like, okay, I'm looking forward to these opportunities where I'm going to have doubt and I could prove to my OCD brain that I don't care anymore. I'm not going to be paying this any attention. So when you have opportunity, instead of feeling like you got to get on defense, you can feel like, this is awesome. I was waiting for this. And if you are really struggling, then set an alarm for a week from now and reevaluate it then. Because in the moment of the trigger, it's always much harder to get in touch with reality. So if you really think like, if you're really struggling and you're really concerned that this might be a legitimate issue, okay, write it down and a week from now come back to it. And more times than not, when a week passes, you're like, I know what I was thinking. That's so clearly OCD. It doesn't bother me anymore. The double bind issue. So for this one, remember someone's walking into a room, they have to walk in with their right foot, and so the exposure is to walking with the left foot, but now the right move is to walking with their left foot, so now they're afraid of walking with their right foot, so the new exposure is to walking with their right foot, and it goes back and forth. So for this one, engage in any behavior, accepting that perhaps it was the wrong one to engage in. So walk into the room with whichever thought, with whichever foot you want to walk in first with. Don't spend time, just walk in. And then tell yourself purposely, you know what? The foot I walked in with was probably the wrong one to walk in with. And that's the exposure that you should be doing. So you're not exposing to the right foot, to the left foot. You're exposing yourself to the wrong foot. And whatever foot you walk in with is the wrong one. Don't ruminate about it after the fact. And come up with a phrase that conveys irrelevance. So telling yourself, like, it could be any type of phrase. It could even be a made up word. But you're walking into the room, you're walking with your right foot. You say, oh my God, was it the right foot? I should have been walking with the left foot. Wait, that was the homework. I should have been the right foot. When all that happens, just convey irrelevance. And the approach you should take is like your mind saying all these random wacky thoughts, whatever. It's irrelevant to my life. But you could come up with a specific phrase. It could be, I believe I once had a client who came up with a phrase in their native language that meant something to the effect of like it's neither here nor there. But you could really come up with any type of phrase that conveys this point to you. When exposures turn into compulsions, so as we mentioned earlier, this can take two forms. It can be repeating the exposure again and again until it's done correctly. So I don't know if I touch a doorknob correctly, I have to touch it again and again and again. Or it could be a checking or testing compulsion where the person maybe is testing themselves because they're so afraid of, let's say, the example I gave was relationship OCD. They're so afraid that this person is not for them. So they tell someone, you know what, I purposely want to look at an unflattering picture of my partner and see if I could tolerate that. Because if I can, it's going to be pretty bad. I really want to get over this already. So it's kind of like a testing or checking compulsion. So if the issue here is that it's repeating the exposures again and again, the homework should be only do an exposure once, even if it wasn't done perfectly. And even if you contaminated the exposure, so to speak. So for example, you you undid the exposure, so you touch a doorknob, but you did hand sanitizer afterwards. I don't care. Don't repeat the exposure no matter what. So in general, we give other rules. We say like, no, recontaminate yourself so that you get the full effect of the exposure. But in this type of case, what I normally tell clients is for you, the rules are you do the exposure once. I don't care what happens after that. You don't go back, whether you did it correctly or incorrectly, whether you undid it or did not undo it. And for checking or testing compulsions, you should only be doing exposures as prescribed in therapy. So in therapy, you'll come up with what days, what time, how frequent, but don't do any exposures in addition to that. So even if you feel like, oh, I'm doing really good at this, I want to just keep doing these exposures more and more and get better at this, don't. Because chances are, if you're falling into this trap here, you're not really doing it as an exposure, you're doing it as a testing compulsion or a checking compulsion. And so that's the rules for you. When it comes to this one, I understand what I need to do for ERP, but when I'm triggered, I feel so stuck. I feel like I'm in a matrix. So there's a few things to keep in mind here. First, you want to pre-commit to a specific response for whenever you're triggered, so that each time you don't feel stuck again as to what you should do or shouldn't do. You have to come with a really strong commitment ahead of time. And this response can be irreverence, so kind of like comedy. So maybe the response is like to respond in a very exaggerated way. So the thought is, I'm going to stab someone. And your response is like, yeah, I probably will. I'll stab everyone. I'll stab myself, to the point where, there's going to be like so many dead bodies all over the place. It'll be hard for people to walk by. Okay, so you just take it to the extreme, make a joke about it in an extreme way, saying like, so that's one pre-committed response you can come up with. You could transform content-specific distress to general distress or uncertainty. So recognizing like, okay, I feel really stuck right now, but I'm not stuck about whether or not I'm a murderer or I'm a pedophile, or whether or not, I'm going to get sick. All that is OCD. I just feel stuck and I feel uncomfortable in my body. But it's easier to deal with like a general discomfort than when the discomfort feels very much attached to your specific theme. You can shift from anxiety reducing behavior to values driven behavior. So instead of telling yourself like, okay, I need to do something to reduce this anxiety, you tell yourself, okay, I'm feeling really stuck now, but regardless of feeling stuck, what are my values and what behavior do I want to engage in that are in line with my values? And that's where I'm focusing my intention. Instead of undoing anxiety, I'm just committing more to my actual life. You could embrace uncertainty, look for those opportunities, and tell yourself, like, I feel so stuck, I'm so uncertain, but this is great. This is exactly where I want to be. I want to get used to tolerating uncertainty. You say thank you, mind, for the thought, which is very much of an ACT cognitive diffusion term. If you're interested in learning more about this, check out my video on ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. Shift your attention back to the valued activity you were doing prior to the trigger. So think about what you were doing beforehand. You feel really stuck now. You want to engage in compulsion. Shift attention back to where you're doing and focus on that. Recognize that the doubt was triggered by a what if, not by concrete evidence to doubt. And when you recognize that, that can then help you get out of the moment and say, okay, my mind's sending me what ifs all the time. I don't need to address it. So you're feeling really stuck because you feel like it's real. But if you recognize that there's nothing really to doubt here, it's just my mind saying what if or maybe this, that can help you feel less stuck as well. How do I differentiate OCD doubt from regular doubt? So, gun to the head approach. Okay, so maybe the question is, how do I know if I'm really angry and I'm going to punch my neighbor in the face, or if it's just an OCD doubt, like, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to punch him in the face. So, the gun to the head approach, which I believe was coined by Jonathan Grayson, another OCD specialist, is saying if someone were to take a gun and point it at your head and say, quick response, are you punching this neighbor or not? If your immediate response is no, that's the accurate response. Okay, and that's how you differentiate OCD doubt from regular doubt. Because regular doubt, gun to the head, you'd be like, I really don't know, I'm not sure. But OCD doubt, you kind of know deep down. You just need to get into that space where your gut tells you what the real answer is, and that can be very helpful. Would you have this doubt pre-OCD? That's another question you can ask yourself. So, assuming you didn't have OCD for your whole life, or you didn't have this theme of OCD, which is very common for people to change themes over time. Would this have been a doubt back in the day? And if not, then you can attribute it to just being an OCD doubt today as well. Would others in your community have this doubt? So maybe, let's say, someone from a religious community, and they have a doubt as to whether or not they skipped a prayer and whether or not they have to repeat it. So how would someone else in your community treat that doubt? And if, other people, if it's a very common doubt to have, or people, would spend time figuring it out, then great. And if not, OCD doubt. Another example might be um, maybe you are, unsure if you got the correct change at the store. Okay, you don't want to be a stealer. So what would other people do when they had this doubt? And that can again help you. Most people are not counting their change from the store to make sure it's exactly perfect that they're not stealing. So that'd be a good indicator that's OCD. And number 4, last one for this slide, OCD doubt is usually triggered by a what if or maybe, not by concrete information from the here and now. So if you want to differentiate OCD doubt from regular doubt, ask yourself, what is triggering this doubt? Is it because I heard a story and now I'm applying it to myself and I'm asking a what if question, or maybe I'm this, or what if that happened, or what if this will happen? Or is there something in my immediate environment that's making me really need to question this? And many times in OCD, the answer is it's coming from what ifs and maybe not from concrete evidence in the here and now. How do I make decisions when I keep going down a rabbit hole, trying to find the right or the correct answer? Right? So this could come up, for example, in relationship OCD, where someone needs to make a decision if I should marry this person or commit to this relationship. Or it could come up in other examples as well, where someone maybe needs to decide, whether or not they should, patron a certain store. And that store may be, you know, doing something inappropriate or they're racist or whatever it might be. And so every time I'm trying to figure out, should I like keep going to that store or not? And OCD is like driving me crazy, constantly making me question it. And no matter what answer I come up with, I think of another possibility as to why I should go or shouldn't go. So how do you deal with this issue? Number 1, recognize that there's no such thing as a right or correct decision. And whatever decision you choose, you'll not be certain about it. And you just need to accept that you're human. And you can't pick the perfect decision because there is no objective perfect decision. Because if you think about it, if you ask some people, they'll tell you X, you ask other people, they'll tell you Y. So this is like a maladaptive misconception that there is some objective truth that I'm trying to get to. In reality, there isn't. And no matter what decision you make, there'll always be arguments against it too. So that's at baseline, the first thing that you should recognize and accept. Number 2, before going down the rabbit hole, think about what process someone else would engage in to get an answer, and then you engage in that process and make a decision without looking back. So as of how would someone else decide if they should patron this store or not? Okay, maybe the answer is they'll ask 1 or 2 friends for their input, spend 5 minutes thinking about it, and choose. So that's what you got to do. Follow those steps. Don't ruminate, don't ask 10 friends, and don't re-question the decision after you made it. Number 3, think about other scenarios where your question or dilemma would be more appropriate and contrast those scenarios with this one to gain insight. So maybe a more appropriate, situation where you would ask, a question of how you should be behaving. Let's pick another example. So let's say your question is, should you see, a dog did what dogs do on the street, and it's not your dog, and your question is, should you like clean it up so no one else like steps in it and gets themselves all dirty, or should you just leave it? And so you're doubting, you're like, okay, the moral thing, the really nice thing to do would be to like clean it up to protect other people, but I really don't want to. I don't know, I can't make a decision. A more appropriate decision, think about what other case would make more sense where you would have such a decision, right? Like maybe that case is like pretty clear, like I'm busy, I don't want to get dirty with that stuff. Like maybe I'll cover it over and move on, but I'm not spending my time cleaning it up. But a more appropriate case would be maybe where there's like a sharp object in the street that someone might actually hurt themselves really badly on. And I do have time to move it, or it's a bit heavy, it's going to take me some extra time, I'm going to have to get someone else's help for it. So those are, once you see like, okay, those cases make sense to have this doubt. This case with dog stuff, I don't have to doubt, I'm just going to move on. So this could be a helpful way as well. Number 4, recognize how your method of trying to find an answer is not working. Also think back to past experiences, how you've tried figuring it out and you haven't figured it out. So why spend all this time and energy if you're anyways not going to get the solution? So if you feel like you need to make a decision, right? Another example is like, how do you want to live your life, or what belief system do you want to buy into? And every time you go down this rabbit hole, you never come to a solution anyways. So recognize that and don't waste your time with it. And then number 5, put off big decisions for a week and not engage in related thoughts until that time. In the moment, it's really hard to make decisions sometimes. So, if you take some time, things tend to be clearer when you stop ruminating about it and when you're not in the triggered moment. So you want to give it some time when you're not in the triggered moment, when you're not ruminating about it constantly, and then you might have more clarity to make your decision. And 6, have an OCD therapist help guide you. So in general, when it comes to OCD, we don't want to be engaging in lengthy processes, which is what the slide might give you the idea of. This is more about where you really have to make a decision, like where should I buy this item? Okay, and OCD is like getting in the way for OCD fears and making that decision. And so these are different processes you can go through to try to come to a decision, and ultimately have an OCD therapist help guide you because it could be complex when you have to make a real decision, such as who am I going to marry? All right, for this one, I can't seem to stay motivated throughout the week to stay committed to ERP homework. Well, if you can't seem to stay motivated, it's a problem. Because if you're not motivated to do the work, you're probably not going to do the work so well, and then you're not going to see the results you want to see. So we have to find ways to increase motivation. Here are a few good ideas. Number one, create a timeline with a final goal and then smaller goals along the way. This can help a lot with motivation. So if you're doing contamination exposures and you're touching the door with a doorknob with one finger and you're not really motivated to do it, so tell yourself okay, my goal is for a month from now to touch a doorknob with my complete hand and not wash my hands. And so the smaller goals are each week I'm going to touch one finger and then two fingers and then three fingers, etc. This can help you stay motivated because you see the bigger picture in mind and the ultimate goal is more rewarding. You can create reinforcement schedule for daily, weekly, and ultimate goal, right, as well. So in addition to creating those goals, you can create a reinforcement schedule. So like every day, at the end of the day, I reward myself with a nice warm cup of hot cocoa or whatever it might be. And then for the week and for the month, and if I do this for a month and I finally touch the doorknob with my whole hand, then I'm going to buy myself something that I really wanted to buy myself for a while. You can write a motivating statement on reason for commitment and remind yourself of that statement. So motivating statement might be related to, this has come up with a bunch of clients of mine, how like the idea of having kids one day and not modeling this type of OCD behavior for their kids, and also being more free when they are with their kids and not so much in their heads can be a really motivating thing for people. So write down some motivating ideas and why you want to commit and review that a few times every day so that you stay motivated. You could set reminder alarms as well so that you remember. And last but not least, you can send a daily email to a trusted friend or a therapist morning and night. And I have this set up for some of my clients where in the morning you're setting the intention for the day. And the intention is, I am staying motivated today to engage in the ERP work. So you're setting the intention, there's some accountability. And then at night, you're closing the loop and saying, I was successful at engaging in the ERP homework today. And so even if you're not getting a lot of responses for the emails you're sending, but at least someone else is looking at it and you're setting the intention in the morning, accountability at night, and this can be really helpful in staying motivated throughout the week. This one here is I'm doing exposures, but the distress level remains the same throughout the exposure. And I've actually had this with a client a number of times. One was where we were doing exposures to contamination, and when they would touch a dirty or what they thought might be a dirty surface and waiting for the distress to go down, it didn't go down. In fact, it went up. So this is very common, especially when the focus is on waiting for distress levels to decrease. If you're waiting for it to decrease and you're paying a lot of attention to it, then it might not decrease. So therefore, the goal should not be to decrease the distress levels. Instead, the goal should be on tolerance and acceptance. So when you're going into the exposure, it's not I'm going in and I'm waiting for the anxiety to decrease, but rather it should be I'm going into this exposure and my goal is to prove to myself that I can tolerate it and I can accept it. That's it. Fortunately, the end result usually also is decreased stress when you're not focusing on that being the goal. But only if you don't focus on it. So it can't be so much of a trick. The goal really should be tolerance and acceptance, but usually what comes along with that is also decreased distress. Then we come to this one. I'm doing exposures, but my OCD is not getting better. So the exposures themselves are coming along okay, For some reason, I still am struggling with OCD and it has not been getting better for the past few weeks. So this can occur for a number of reasons. First, you might be using exposure homework as checking compulsions, like I mentioned before. And if that's the case, you want to make sure that you're just doing the exposure homework as prescribed in the therapy session, not on your own whenever you choose to for whatever reason. So pick a time during the therapy session that you plan to do exposures every day and stick to that without doing it more or at different times. Number two, perhaps you're not committed to response prevention. So you could be doing exposures, but if you're still engaging in the compulsions, then of course exposures are not going to work. And so you want to find ways to commit to the response prevention component as well. Three, unidentified compulsions, usually mental compulsions. So you might be doing the exposure and you're not actually engaging in visible intentional compulsions. So for example, you're touching the doorknob, you're contaminating yourself, and you're not washing your hands. But you are still engaging in some mental compulsions. Maybe you're thinking in your mind, what are the chances that I'm going to get sick or not going to get sick? And so if that's the case, you want to be able to identify these compulsions and stop doing them. Number four, buying into the OCD content, even when refraining from compulsion. So let's say you're doing great with response prevention. So you're refraining from the compulsions, but you're still buying into the OCD content. So you still have the thought like, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick. And so what you need to do in that case is learn how to convey irrelevance to the thoughts. Recognize thoughts for what they are, just thoughts. And you have these thoughts and other people have other thoughts. And it doesn't mean that, just because you're having thoughts, it doesn't mean you actually have to listen to them or pay attention. So you want to not only engage in exposures and response prevention, you want to take on an approach, an overall approach of conveying irrelevance to all this OCD content. And number five, giving in to minor compulsions. Sometimes you may tell yourself, like, I'm doing great with exposures, I'm not doing compulsions, but the really small compulsions I'm still doing. Like on my way out, I'll take a glance at the stove just to make sure that it's all off. Or as I'm locking my door, I'm just, trying to push on my door one more time to make sure it's not locked. So in this case, you are again giving into compulsions, even though they are just minor ones. And what you want to do is remember the analogy to choking out a fire and giving no oxygen. So just like a fire, if it's still getting some oxygen, it's going to stay alive, similar to OCD. Part of the reason your OCD might not be getting better is because, yes, you're doing pretty good, but you're still keeping it alive by engaging in these minor compulsions. And so you want to stop engaging in these compulsions completely. And in fact, you can make that as a homework item, which is not just to not do general compulsions, but the specific homework item can be not doing minor compulsions. And this way you'll feel more motivated to stop, even though technically they seem to be minor. And now for the last one, even when I succeed in response prevention, I still feel like I have an unresolved itch. So I did a response prevention, but I still feel like I need to wash my hands and my hands feel really contaminated. So here are a few things to keep in mind. You want to try to focus back on your actual life and engage in value-driven behavior. Okay, so instead of focusing on the itch, tell yourself, like, okay, I'm noticing the itch, but what is my life? What are my values? And what behavior do I want to focus in on? And once you focus on something else, the itch tends to go away on its own. Or you can separate out the itch feeling from the specific OCD content. So instead of saying like my hands feel really itchy as if I need to like wash them, not actually itchy, but I have this itch, this urge to wash my hands because I feel like they're contaminated, you can tell yourself like, okay, OCD content is irrelevant, but now I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable in my hands. So what do you do in general when you're feeling uncomfortable? When it's not specifically OCD, you might decide to engage in fun or relaxing activities to kind of de-stress. So all that type of stuff you can do. You just don't want to do compulsions addressing the obsession. But if you separate out the obsession from the general discomfort feeling or feeling like you still have an urge, go ahead and do other stuff and have some fun or engage in relaxing activities or meaningful activities, and that can help. And last but not least, release energy in positive ways, similar to what I said now, but kind of like exercising, socializing, engross yourself in chores, get back to your actual life. So in short, there are many possible treatment challenges, but they all have solutions. And an OCD specialist should be able to help you identify your specific challenges and generate tailored solutions for the specific challenges that you are coming up against. Conveying irrelevance is super important when it comes to OCD work. And that's like, if there was one takeaway, is if you can convey irrelevance to this stuff, it tends to fall away. It's when we're giving it all this meaning that it's staying alive and causing issues. Hope you enjoyed this video seminar. To see a full list of our current videos as well as upcoming videos that we'll be posting soon, visit us at adopsychologycenter.com and sign up to be notified when we post new videos. Bye for now.